Hey there, folks. That was some great up the neck backup from Sammy Shelor on the song I'll Take the Blame, and that's going to be the subject of our backup study today. It's a really great example of some up the neck backup, but he also mixes in some down the neck stuff. It's a really dynamic use of different backup techniques that are pretty traditional, but maybe kind of using it in a modern way. So there are so many different things we can learn from this example. And I'm going to show you all these ideas and show you some different ways to use them. But if you really want to understand this stuff, it's crucial that you hear the source material. So go check out Lonesome River Band, I'll Take the Blame. It's from an album called Old Country Town, and this is the backup that Sammy Shelor plays on the first verse. And once you do that, you'll notice that we are in the key of B. Sammy's got his capo on the 4th fret. But for the purpose of this lesson, I'm just going to show you everything in the key of G, no capo, anything like that. So here's that same example of backup, this time played more slowly in the key of G. So there's a couple different ways that you can look at this information. The first is to just say that this is what Sammy played at this point in this song, in this key, and if you want to do that, then you can just play exactly what he played, and that'll work great. And that's true, and to an extent, that can be helpful. But much more often, the way that I look at this stuff is that this is all information that you can use in this situation, but also on different songs, different keys, different tempos, different parts of the fretboard. You can really stretch and pull this information to get a lot out of it. And the nice thing about a lot of this information is that because it's closed position, meaning no open strings, you can move a lot of it around to just about anywhere you want on the fretboard. That means any chord, any key, any song. But anyway, let's just dig into this example. The song is I'll Take the Blame, which is just 1, 4, 5. So if we're thinking about the key of G, that's just G, C, and D, like a lot of bluegrass songs. So a lot of this stuff is going to apply to a lot of the other songs that you might be familiar with. And the first line of the verse is all G, just 4 measures of G. So here's what Sammy plays on the first line of the verse. So the first thing we have is a walk up into our G chord. And what Sammy does here is a very Earl Scruggs type idea. He starts here in this root position, and then he moves up to the first inversion here. So you can think about that as your F shape and your D shape, depending on how you look at it or how you've learned these chords. But in any case, that's something that's really important to know how to do, to go between these two shapes. A lot of people will do it with this vamping pattern. But there are a lot of roll patterns that people will use as well. Some different from what Sammy played exactly here, but they're all basically the same idea. That kind of idea. And no matter what pattern you're playing or what you're doing in the right hand, it's kind of the same idea in the left hand, that you're just trying to get from this shape up to this shape. And you might have to just think about how many frets you need to count to get from one to the other, or which fingers need to switch. There's a bunch of different ways you can think about this, but as long as you get some sort of equation in your mind as to what that looks like to move between those, then that becomes no problem, especially because you want to be able to do that with different chords. So you want to do that in G, also C, D, and you're back to G. You can play the entire song just with that kind of shape. And by the way, you'll see tablature on screen for a lot of these ideas, but anything else that you're looking for, you're going to find on patreon.com/EliGilbertBanjo. Patreon is where I put all the tablature for all my lessons, all the bonus content, stuff you can't find here on YouTube. So you'll get a full PDF of this entire example, plus all the extra ideas that I show you in different chords, different keys, that sort of stuff. You'll be able to find that by going to a link in the description, patreon.com/EliGilbertBanjo. Anyway, let's get back to the lesson. We get out of that position and then into the C chord, the 4 chord, with a nice little walk down from the root G. And then we're leading into the C chord. And what that does effectively is turn this G chord into a G7 chord, a G dominant 7th chord. And so when you put it all together, you can hear it going from one chord to the next. And so in addition to being able to just play these major chord shapes and use these right hand patterns on any chord you want, you can use that device as well, leading from one chord to another. So in this case, we're going from G to C. That's a 1 chord to a 4 chord. You could also use basically the same idea going from a D chord to a G chord. You could think of that as going to a 5 chord to a 1 chord. So then the following line of the song is 2 measures of C back to 2 measures of G. Sounds like this. Now, no one would accuse Sammy Shelor of sounding just like Earl Scruggs, but that is where he got a lot of his ideas. So when he gets to the C chord, he plays something exactly like what Earl would play, which is basically just a C major chord with the addition of the 6th A, which he's doing with his thumb. He wraps it over. And for the most part, just playing a forward roll through the entire chord. Now, it's worth noting that if you're going to play this shape, it's not particularly easy on the chord C. It's far enough down on the neck that the frets are far enough apart that it just makes for kind of an awkward stretch. It doesn't mean it's unplayable. It doesn't mean that I even avoid it. I definitely still play it all the time, but it's possible that starting out here is going to be a little uncomfortable. But just like with all these shapes, you can put them anywhere. So it's worth practicing this higher up the neck in a place where it's a little easier to reach. And the way that you're going to do that, just put the shape wherever you want, is to think about your F chord shape, that root position shape again, which in this case we could think about G. And then you're going to count down 1, 2, 3, 4 from the root. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you're going to put your thumb on that fret on the 5th string. So if we're playing this G chord with the root on the 17th fret, then our thumb is going to be on the 14th fret on the 5th string. Moving on, the second half of that line after the 2 measures of C is 2 measures of G, which sounds like this. And the way I think about that first up the neck lick is that you're sliding into the root, and then you're working out of that same shape, the same first inversion, or D chord shape you might think, for the G chord. So even though you're not playing everything, you're still working through that shape. You can do that same idea again with any of these shapes. If that's your G chord, here's your C chord. You can do the same thing. You can do the same thing for a D chord. Out of this D chord here. And some people will then exit that like Sammy does and play this open G lick. But while you're already here, playing the rest of this shape, you might as well continue and play some of the same ideas from earlier in the backup example. That wasn't something that Sammy played, it was just some ideas back to back in a different order. So it's all things he played, but not in that order. Do the same thing if you went to the C chord. D chord. Of course, in this example, Sammy doesn't stay up the neck and play more of those ideas. He jumps down and plays an open G lick, leading back into the second half of the verse. And once we get to that second half, we have some really familiar material, pretty close to what we play at the beginning of the first half of this verse. Those first two measures are not exactly what we play at the beginning of the first half of the verse, but it's all the same positions at the same times. So you can just think about this as different combinations of the same ideas. So you don't have to play exactly one of these ideas. They're not all just special and unique and have to happen in exactly that place. It's really just an area where you can play around. So you'll never really hear him play exactly the same thing twice, but he'll use the same shapes and play around with the different ideas within those shapes. Then in the following two measures, we have something new that we haven't seen yet. This idea is again kind of a staple of the Scruggs style language, some stuff that Earl Scruggs definitely played, but again, it's just a little unique. You can play around with these ideas, you don't have to play them exactly this way. So again, you won't hear Sammy necessarily play this exact lick. I think later in the same song he plays something similar to this with the same shape, but again, it's not going to be exactly the same. So you want to learn the concept, not just the exact lick necessarily. But a good way to get into the concept is by learning the lick first. So here's how I'm thinking about this one. We're up here at the 12th fret, and I'm thinking about this bar shape for the G chord. So just all on the 12th fret. And we're just working with these top two strings, and we're bouncing between the first string and the second string for the most part. And then on the first string, we're moving up and down. So on the first string, we're going 12, 14, 15, 14 again. Back to 12. And then intermittently, we're bouncing between the second string on the 12th fret. So this isn't exactly how he plays it, but this is the general concept. You can just repeat that same thing over and over again. Of course, the way he plays it, that's a more stylized lick that's actually leading into the next part of the song. But the general concept is just bouncing between those two strings. And this is worth a whole lesson of its own. There's a lot of interesting things that Earl played that this is kind of based on. But the general concept is, again, just based on this bar shape. So if you want to do this for other chords, you just think about where the other bar shape for each chord is. So you could do this, for instance, for D. If you had the bar here at the 7th fret, and you're thinking about these top two strings, that sort of thing. Now, moving on to the final line of the song, we have a 1-5-1 turnaround. That means G, D, G. We have some ideas we've already seen, some new ones. Here's how that goes. So we start with our sliding up the neck lick, the one that we saw earlier in this example, on a G chord, leading down to the D chord. And then once we get to the D chord, we have something we technically haven't seen yet before, but it is using this D chord shape. So when we play something like this, it's not that different from all the stuff we've been playing up here with that same shape. All of that stuff is kind of the same, so you should really think about any of these D-shaped materials, even if it's happening over a D chord, as stuff that you can move around. But in this case, we are using it on an actual D chord, so we go from our sliding up the neck lick, D, then we have something completely new, another down the neck lick that adds a lot of energy leading to the chorus, which is leading to a 4 chord, the C chord. So besides being just a really great lick, this sounds awesome. It's also a great example of using the double thumb on the fourth string. And this is a question that I get all the time. I'll show examples of players like Earl, JD, Terry Bauckham, and now Sammy Shelor playing licks where you use your thumb twice in rapid succession on the same string in a way that seems maybe not the most ergonomic, maybe not that efficient, not that convenient. But at the end of the day, a lot of the times it just sounds better to use your thumb twice. That said, there are no rules. You can do anything you want. You don't have to play it like I play it. You don't have to play it like Sammy plays it. I'm just showing you what I've learned, and then you can do what you want with that information. And I really like the way that it sounds when Sammy plays it, so I'm going to try to emulate that. It doesn't have to be exact, but I am going to look for the things that contribute to that sound, and I think the double thumb on the fourth string achieves that. Anyway, that's the entire verse. From that point, he leads on to the chorus. So that's the end of this example. But of course, that's not the end of what you can do with these ideas. I made a point to learn everything that Sammy played here because I really liked the way he played it. The dynamics were really interesting. It's just really good music. But if I want to make music of my own, I have to take those ideas and use them somehow differently. Not differently just for the sake of being different necessarily, but because I'm going to be playing different songs at different speeds in different keys. And so the way that I do that is the same as how I've been describing it throughout this entire lesson. I'm taking these ideas and seeing where else I can put them, different keys, different chords, and even just playing in the same key, same chords, but maybe swapping these licks. So over on Patreon, as I discussed earlier, you'll find some other examples of how I would use this stuff, how I can rearrange this to play an entirely new set of backup on this song in the same key, everything, just rearranging all these licks. In effect, if you keep doing that, you have kind of unlimited options. So you might find it useful to see a couple examples of how that's done and then do some of your own. But otherwise, that's going to do it for this lesson. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video, check out Patreon, all of that stuff. But otherwise, that's going to do it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.